Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murder. This is Jeff Jones. With me today is starting off with a partial panel, hoping that Big Jeff is able to join us at some point in this episode. So let's go and meet the partial panel again and reintroduce each other like we do every week. It's nice to see you, Dr. Silkman. How are you doing this morning down under?
I'm doing very well, and thank you very much, Jeff, and hi to all my fellow panel members. What? No, Big Jeff. We have to stop this podcast. We can't. We got to have Big Jeff's wrap up. It's Big Jeff.
You guys are wrapping up already? How's that possible?
We
It's
finished
not
Big
possible. We were saying we were going to miss your wrap up. We'll get to you last, I guess, now because you got to wait. We're going to go to Jack next and introduce him. Hey, Jack, welcome back. Let's let Big Jeff get settled in.
Hey, thanks there, Jeff, and hello all my panel members and everyone in the live chat. Yeah, we definitely couldn't have done without Big Jeff, because how can we go on to the next if he's not here? And the wrap up. Come on.
It's a really good question. How do you on to the next if you don't have the first part, right? Thank you, Jack. And Kellie, how you doing?
Terrible, absolutely terrible sleep last night. Over here in Western Australia, it is very humid and it just kept everyone awake. No matter how much airflow we had pumping into the house, it was just still a very uncomfortable rest. So I'm a little bit tired today, but I'm here and it's good to see Big Jeff is here and all the panel members. Let's get going.
Yeah, let's get to it. On to the next. They say, Big Jeff, welcome. I'm glad that you made it just in the nip of time.
Wow, the outpouring of love is just overwhelming. I'm not sure I can take it. But the love that we need to have is for Stephen and Brandon today. Today is March 1st, if I'm not mistaken, which is a very auspicious anniversary in Brendan's case. And you really need to take a second and reflect exactly what they did to that kid and exactly the shenanigans that the state pulled off. There was a Reddit thread going on today. I forget who put it up, asking about one of the questions that we went over, I think, on the last podcast, or maybe a couple podcasts ago, with the volume of the DNA that was on the hood latch swab. And when they were reminded of exactly how long it was and what prompted the search for the hood latch swab in the first place, that was 5 months later. And it wasn't until Wiegert and Fassbender asked what Stephen was doing under the hood, totally unprompted by Brendan, that was discovered. So that, you really have to remember that stuff about Brendan's case and the total shenanigans and assholery of Wiegert and Fassbender during that interview. So with that, it's a very astute time. I know what that picture is. I know damn well what that picture is. So let's get to it, because I know that one of us is going to blow a gasket today. That's my prediction of the day. And I'm not sure who it's going to be first to blow that gasket. But my bet is on Dr. Silk.
It's not such a bold prediction, but it is a prediction in itself, Big Jeff.
Very good prediction.
And I appreciate that. So without any further ado,
the investigators didn't find out until later that she was shot in the garage. So when they started asking about the head, Dassey couldn't think of the shooting because his mind was on the bedroom where all of the other things happened.
So I want to ask you, do you agree that age is a relevant factor in determining whether a confession is voluntary?
I do, but
and the Supreme Court said that juvenile confessions must be evaluated with special care. So I want to know exactly where the Wisconsin Appellate Court decision considers Dassey's age and where it was given special care.
Dassey's age is listed in the opinion.
Yeah, it's listed, but in special care is more than just listing, don't you think?
It said it was basing its opinion on the trial court's decision, and the trial court's decision spent a lot of time on age. So I think on habeas especially, you can't assume that the Wisconsin Court of Appeals did not consider age.
What's I'm sorry.
During the videotaped confession, Mr. Dassey comes out with a lot of details that he supplies. The opposing side has explained that as details that had been publicized.
I think there's a few minor points. So there's a few facts that we know had been.
You go first, Jack 61.
No, you take it, Doc, because I'm going to break something, I swear to God. Because I'm thinking back, I'm thinking not only about this right here, I'm thinking back because I listened to some of last week's episode again, and just the shit that comes out of this guy's mouth is unbelievable. Just absolutely unbelievable. But you take it.
Well, I'll be very quick. Paul Iceberg, I call him. Someone of his ilk, he can't lie straight in a coffin, right? He knows he has to absolutely lie through his teeth because the judges are questioning him, and he knows that if he agrees with any of the dissenting judges, he knows his whole case is out the window. So isn't it very interesting how Judge Hamilton came to his rescue by saying, well, Brendan Dassey did provide a lot of detail, right? The question is that the foul play team and many other researchers around the world have gone through Brendan Dassey's confession, line by line. Brendan Dassey did not supply anything unique to him. So if he was the rapist, if he was the killer, if he was involved in shooting, dismembering, and cremating Teresa Halbach, he did not provide one piece of unique evidence or statement that could be backed up, which meant that Brendan Dassey concocted a story from hearsay, from what he saw in the media, probably heard from his family, and most importantly, what he reconstructed from Fassbender and Wiegert, the two interrogators. So the two judges that were sort of saying, hey, come on, he's 16, you can see that Paul Iceberg just simply waved it away. And to me, that's very, very telling indeed. Absolute garbage.
And he says there are some minor examples of when the cops fed information. When is a minor example okay? Number one, because I don't care if it's a big or small, you did it, right? Number one. Number two, I think I would ask them, just give me an example of when what is one of these minor instances, and then tell me which ones the major ones are, so we can filter through that. Because I take a little issue with him calling them minor, because he's trying to downplay the importance of these suggestions or this information that's being fed. And I think we all see through it. That's all I have to say.
I think I agree, Jeff, and Big Jeff will talk in a second. But I just wanted to make a very important observation here. This is the way Paul Iceberg got around Brendan's not knowing about the shooting to the head. And Paul Berg said, the reason why he couldn't remember the shooting scenario to the head was because Brendan was thinking about still in the bedroom. Now, are you trying to tell me that Brendan was sophisticated enough to be completely shielded from a horrific shooting scenario because Brendan was only thinking about what was happening in the bedroom? Right? Now, I'm sure everybody else will comment, but it goes to show the desperation by someone like Paul Berg being so dismissive of Brendan Dassey. Personally, I find that very offensive.
Well, Doc, you're right. I don't think Agatha Christie herself could have thought that one up. That's quite the yarn that he spun there. But if I could return for a second to Jeff's question regarding which ones were the big ones and which ones were the small ones, I'd like to say what ones I think are the big ones. The big ones are the ones that led to the search warrant and the ones that led to the discovery of obviously planted evidence against Stephen Avery, right? And therefore, those two pieces are, we shot her in the garage, which is what gave them the chance to write a search warrant for the garage. And that was preceded by Brendan saying, oh, we shot her outside. And Fassbender saying, no, Brendan, that's a lie. And then what happens? Oh, the garage. Oh, now we're getting somewhere, Brendan, right? Now we can believe you on that. please explain to me what crystal ball Fassbender used to be able to really know for certain that she was shot in the garage and not in the and not in the outside. And again, the other one was who shot her in the head prompt. So those are the two big pieces. Both of them delivered by. Oh, sorry. What was he doing under the hood? Another one completely unprompted by anything that Brendan said. Law enforcement had to prompt it. And this, this is absolutely why you can tell Brendan's confession is an absolute farce, because law enforcement had to plant the thing in his head. It's quite obvious that he was just trying to tell them what they wanted to hear, exactly the same as the November 6th interview in Crivets, where by the end of that interview, he was saying, oh, yeah, we saw Teresa Hallback. We had to step out of the driveway to get out of her way as she was driving her car out of the driveway. And he wasn't under suspicion of anything. He just wants to get people out of his face, and he'll say whatever he has to get people out of his face. And that's what happened in this confession. And that's why it's obvious that law enforcement put those thoughts in front of him and didn't stop questioning him until he repeated those same thoughts and accusations. And I was close to losing it, but not quite. So you guys better go, because I'm about this close from smashing my wife's new computer.
Well, to add a bit more to both of what you guys are saying, they went after him multiple times prior to March 1st, 2006. They were already up in his ass. In this statement, Luke Berg's, I just cannot fathom him making the statement and these judges not knowing that he's lying, because they've got the same transcripts that we've got. How could they not know? There's just absolutely no way. And of course, as always, where would Stephen's case be without Brendan? This coerced confession. Where would the case be? It was, the strongest evidence was the RAB, and that would have become I think that would have become more front and center. Otherwise, who knows where that would have went. Kratz knew he had to put Teresa inside that property somewhere. And that's exactly what they did. Unbelievable.
100% agree, Jack 61 and also Big Jeff. Now let's think about this, right? If you totally remove Brendan Dassey from the entire equation, everything, in other words, Brendan Dassey was never questioned, he's never put in prison, then that makes the case against Stephen Avery 100% circumstantial. It meant that the state were in huge trouble because they had no idea of how the crime progressed and how the crime actually occurred against Teresa Hallback, the victim. Enter Brendan Dassey, who supplies everything that the state needed. Now, Kathleen Zellner made a very important observation, and we discussed this. Brendan Dassey was just another plant that was used by the state, right? So unfortunately for Brendan, he was used, discarded, and put in prison because they could not let Brendan go. So from his interrogation, and I agree with what Jack 61 said, they used the fruits of his testimony in Stephen Avery's trial. Think about it. No hood latch, swab, no IDMFL. All of a sudden, your case against Stephen starts to become much more shaky. Yes, there is the blood inside the RAV4, which is very difficult to explain. But if you're looking for a planting scenario, I believe it does strengthen the defense's case. Now that you factor in Brendan, it makes it much more difficult to convince a jury, right? And of course, what did Ken Kratz do on November 2nd? The press conference? Need I say anymore? Disaster.
Yeah, the final thought I have on Berg is that, and this is, I think you guys probably saw this as well, and that he constantly has this crystal ball and he knows exactly what all the officers are thinking at all times, and he knows exactly what Brendan is thinking at all times. And now he's trying to get into the judge's head and trying to think what they're thinking. And so I just think that when he argues this, it's so disingenuous that we're all ready to just smash our iPads. Because it's just so plainly BS.
But there's one thing that's important here. Paul Berg immediately would have realized that 2 of those judges were hostile to him. And one of them, Judge Hamilton, was sympathetic. Do you get it? So he immediately knew who was giving him a real hard time and who was much more amenable to what Paul Berg was saying. These guys pick up hints and cues super quick. They're trained to do it. So Berg knew he was in trouble already.
You know, I thought Dr. Silkman made a very good point about what pieces of evidence does the state have against Stephen without Brendan's confession. Besides the RAV, the blood on the RAV and the hood latch key, what do they have? Can you remind me?
They've got the key from the bedroom,
Right.
and that's and even Jack 61. I don't want to trigger Jack 61, but you know that Ken Kratz tried to run away from the key. He knew the key was suspicious as all hell. Then they've got the number plates, right? But there's nothing on the number plates. So
Right.
in essence, what you've got, the biggest piece of it, plus not forgetting, you've got the burnt electronics, right? But how are they going to prove that it was Stephen Avery who burnt those electronics? You've obviously got Teresa Hallbach's cremains in his burn pit, but they're problematic too because you've got cremains elsewhere. So I believe a good defense team could have argued every one of those pieces of evidence, right? So the biggest damning evidence pointing to Stephen at that stage was the 6 drops of blood and flakes inside the RAV4.
And the second biggest is probably the key in the bedroom, right?
Correct.
Which so obviously planted. They needed something else. They needed something else.
He had to have it. He had to have it, and he knew it. Yeah, there's no doubt.
Been released by the police officers, but the vast majority of them had not.
But was there physical evidence of a rape or of a wound to the throat?
No, because the body was totally destroyed.
So those come only from Dassey's confession.
That's right. Yes. But
And
there
would
were
not
2
have been publicized ahead of time.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Now,
Where was the blood from the wound in the throat? You bleed a lot. Last time I checked, the blood squirts everywhere when you cut somebody.
Yeah. Not a drop.
Not
Not a
drop.
molecule.
Correct. I mean, the stupid thing is that, and we did a podcast on Foul Play about the use of the MVAC. And I believe that the MVAC really should be used by Nyrider and Drizzen because they now have a fantastic opportunity to make Berg, Hamilton, and all the other judges look like a bunch of assholes. Because now, remember what he said. Oh, okay, so the cutting of the throat only came from Brendan Dassey, right? Well, when they forensically tested the room, there was no evidence of any blood, body fluids, nothing pertaining to Teresa Hallbach. And Jack 61 will back me up. They took away the wood paneling and also the carpet. Okay, you now want to be more sophisticated? Well, why don't you MVAC the carpet, MVAC the mattress? So if there's any blood, tissue pertaining to Teresa Hallbach or even Brendan Dassey, it'll detect it, right? Now, quite clearly, there are things that Stephen Avery could control, but there are things that he can't control. He's not going to be able to control microspray of blood and other body fluids which are present in that room, in the trailer, and also in the garage. Hey, if the state were aggressive, I think it's time now to turn the tables on the state and say, where is your proof? Where is your proof?
obviously there were vague promises of leniency, right?
I think there weren't even implied promises of leniency. Even if there were specific warnings that contradicted any
Oh my God. Did you hear that? Like how there wasn't any, but if there were, then it was okay.
It's weasel wording to the max, right? And there are obviously, Brendan, it's going to be okay. Just tell us the truth and it's going to be okay. How is Brendan with a limited language, with a language barrier, supposed to interpret that? It's going to be okay, Brendan. Here's my hand on your knee. Just tell us the truth. It's going to be okay. Just what the fuck is he talking about?
And I agree with Big Jeff. This is the horrible side of the criminal justice system, whereby you have to deflect anything that hurts you. And don't forget, Judge Duffin went through all of the testimony. He went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Judge Duffin had nothing to do with the Teresa Halbach case. He went through it as an independent arbiter. And even he detected and determined that Brendan's interrogation was a complete farce. 2 of the judges on that panel agreed with Judge Duffin, right? The only person who didn't get it is Paul Berg. Now, that's saying something, isn't it?
It sure is, Dr. Silkman. And the thing that's really aggravating to me here is if you ask this guy, Paul Berg, Iceberg, what his job is, right? His answer ought to be, I'm working for justice for the citizens of Wisconsin. And I have news for him that Brendan Dassey is also a citizen of Wisconsin and deserves justice too. The way he's acting is just this, he is desperately trying to protect the verdict, and that's quite obvious what he's doing. But that's really not what his job ought to be. How many times has Kathleen Zellner come forward and said that she's had, cooperative DAs who are more interested in justice than they are in protecting these incorrect verdicts? They come forward. There was evidence withheld. There was new evidence discovered. It's just this guy. He is acting like this is a game to win, and not that there is a 16-year-old, 17-year-olds of life at stake because of the bullshit that the law enforcement pulled. It's just what he's doing in my mind is completely unethical.
To me, it's really bordering on criminal. To me,
absolutely, 100%.
My final comment on this point is Paul Berg. Who's his boss? Who's his ultimate boss?
The Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin.
Oh yeah,
it's
Brad Schimmel.
And who's the one that disputed the umpire's decision, Judge Duffin's decision? Brad Schimmel. And correct me if I'm wrong, but was Brad Schimmel in the audience? Was he there at the hearing, at the en banc?
Well, the en banc, I think he was, but not here.
Okay. So, in other words, he's got a job to do, right? And that is to protect the wishes of his boss, to make sure that Brendan Dassey doesn't walk out of prison, right? So, quite clearly, these guys would have practiced for a long period of time, right? They would have had mock questions given to them. They would have gone through mock trials. They would have anticipated questions. Now, think about it. The state has got a massive advantage because Brad Schimmel would know all of those attorneys or judges sitting on that en banc panel. And remember what he said, guys. He said, sometimes you don't get the right panel. Isn't that disgraceful, coming straight from the Attorney General himself?
Remember, Kratz sucking up the Fallon, wanting to be part of the mock trial assembly if there was one. I can help you, and all blah blah blah. And
the humorous.
Correct.
What about wrong on the law and wrong on the facts, right? I mean, all of a sudden, the 3-judge panel affirms his judgment of the facts are as presented by the defense and the laws with the defense, right? What happened to that? Schimmel would want to turn tail from that as fast as he could, this scumbag.
The part that I just can't let just wash away is the goalpost moving. Like when I joked last podcast with you, Big Jeff, that I said that we might be watching a workshop from Marquette Law School. Unfortunately, I think that's come true here, because what is he doing on the goalpost of the actual argument? He goes, well, that didn't happen, but if it did happen, here's an excuse for you. I mean, those are basically his words. So I just want to say this. I didn't break the cookie jar. But if I did break the cookie jar, it was just a small little break that
I
you
didn't take any
shouldn't
of the cookies
concern
out of it.
yourself with.
You know,
That's
you make a
all.
good
I
point
rest
about
my
Marquette
case.
Law School. You know, and I think that if you graduate from Marquette Law School, you don't have to pass the Wisconsin bar, is my
That's
recollection.
right. Confirmed.
Let me tell you something. They need to reevaluate that because these guys are, you know, doing what they want to do. They're not practicing law or interested in justice. This is a completely and totally politically motivated, show that this guy is putting on because Schimmel probably has higher political ambitions and he just doesn't want, he wants this. He doesn't want to be the guy that let loose the mass murderer Brendan Dassey or the horrific rapist Brendan Dassey. You know, that's not what he wants on his political record, and that's why this has happened. Politically motivated.
Any implications. But let me just reiterate, we're on habeas review, right? So you're going to have factors that cut in different directions in every case. And where that's true, reasonable minds can certainly differ. Reasonable minds could definitely conclude that Dassey's confession was voluntary here. He was Mirandized, even though he didn't have to be. He was interviewed for only 3 hours in the middle of the day. He was offered food and breaks. Both his mother and he consented to the interview. He signed a Miranda waiver. He resisted the officers multiple times. There's just no evidence that his will was overborne. If anything, there's evidence to the contrary. And all of the precedent supports the state here. It doesn't support Dassey.
Okay. Ms. Ryder.
Okay, here we go. Go ahead, Doc.
I just wanted to say, I think Paul Iceberg must have listened to the wrong interrogation. It's quite clear that Paul Berg is in La La Land and Fantasy Land. He knows he's been handed a grenade by the state, and he's holding that grenade, and that grenade is live, right? So he's basically got to diffuse. Hey, did you like my analogy there? He's got to diffuse that grenade because at any moment it's going to go off, right? So did you see what he did? He read a shopping list about Brendan Dassey. Oh, yeah, he was Mirandized. His mum gave permission. You know, they treated him nicely. There was nothing to worry about because he knew that if he had any hesitation or doubt, those two dissenting judges would have ripped him to shreds. So it's very easy how he tiptoed through the minefield to say, nothing to see here, guys. Let's keep on going. It's completely shocking.
Yeah, again, it's completely outrageous that there's no evidence that his will was overborne. He resisted in some cases. What cases when the cops raised their voices or they just kept on saying, "Oh, Brendan, that's a lie," he changed every time. That's not me. You know, people make it sound like, oh, his will was overborne. That means, that somehow means that they got him to do something that was against his moral code or something like that. What it really means is he wanted them out of his face, and he was willing to say anything just to get the hell out of that room. Right? He didn't care what it was, even if it meant admitting to rape and murder. He didn't understand really what he did. Oh, I can go back to school now, right? That's the key. Should be your key to understand that he had no idea what he was acquiescing to, because everything was going to be all right. If you just tell me what I want to hear, everything's going to be fine. Tell me now, Brendan. What it's a lie. Where'd you shoot her? Outside. Oh, that's a lie, Brendan. Oh yeah, the garage. Oh yeah, that's what it was. It's every single time they're putting stuff in his for him to follow. It's like, no, not this. This isn't true. You got to say something different. What are you going to say next? And it kept on happening and happening and happening. That's what overbearing his will means. It's not forcing him into some type of crazy slavery. It's a bet. I don't even really like that terminology. Get out of my damn face.
Or the 50s backroom swinging light bulb on the rubber gloves. It wasn't like that at all. And we gave him sandwiches and a soda. Come on.
It didn't need to be, right? I mean, the kid would say anything. Look at the November 6th interview, right? It's just
That's right.
The kid would say anything.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And just a quick point here, guys. We must remember what happened to Brendan Dassey is not unique, right? I know we keep on saying how horrible it was, and it was, but it's not unique. I've seen a lot of interviews, interrogation sessions, very much like this that happened to Brendan, to other people, including highly intelligent individuals who in the end confessed because of the Reed technique. I've also seen the same thing occur to Matt Livers. Remember Jack 61, the double homicide of his grandparents in Nebraska. And if you watch that interrogation session, what happened to Brendan happened to Matt Livers. And what did Matt Livers do the day after? He went to see the interrogator and said, "You know, I was
he recanted.
He recanted.
Like, holy shit.
He recanted. He goes, "You know, I only just wanted to get out of there, so I told you what you wanted to hear," right? So yes, it does happen. And unfortunately, because of the Reed technique, it will solicit a confession that is not true, right? So the Reed technique, that's one of its fatal flaws. If you use the Reed technique on intellectually challenged, especially young individuals, you're going to overbear their will, and they will say anything. And Big Jeff made a fantastic point. After all this raping, shooting, murdering, cremation, he goes, "Can I please get back to school? Because I've got a project to hand in." How ridiculous.
Leniency. That promise was, quote, "You're scared that you might get arrested, but, quote, I'm thinking you're all right, okay? You don't have to worry about things." They told him this was true even if he gave, quote, "statements against your own interest that make you look more involved."
I want to ask you, were the investigators aware of his intellectual or emotional limitations? And if not, was that necessary?
I don't know whether they knew his precise IQ score, but it's not important here whether they knew. The question of voluntariness is not a referendum on the state of mind of the officers. The question is, what message was sent to Brendan Dassey? And did it overbear his will?
Look, I've watched the whole thing. I don't see a will being overborne.
I'm sorry. I wanted to let it go, but I've seen it. I would urge anyone in chat, anyone who's seeing this video, to go and watch this in its entirety, and I dare you to try to say what this judge just said.
Yeah, I think the problem is, I'm sorry, Doc. I think the problem is it's the failure of the term itself, right? Overbearing the will. It's a bad term, right? What does it mean? You know, if I can sit here and I'll tell Kel, go out and kill someone. Kel, go out and do this. Go out and beat your dog, right? That's like overbearing her will would mean that she would actually go and do something that's against her, moral. That's it's too strong of a term for what happened, right? They harangued him into it, right? That's what they did. They just kept on getting in his face and telling him, and he just changed his story. That's saying overbearing his will. I mean, it's too strong a connotation, and the judge is kind of harping on the connotation of what that could possibly mean to make that statement. He's obviously doing it deliberately, right? Because he's a shill for Schimmel. But let's clarify the terms, right? It's a poor term, and what Brendan did was he bowed to the haranguing, just like he did on November 6th.
I agree 100%, Big Jeff. But you notice how Judge Hamilton played his card straight up front, right? He made his position clear immediately to Laura Nyrider. So Laura Nyrider knew who was going to be hassling her all the time. Now, with what Laura Nyrider was saying, now look, you can't be too critical, because I could imagine. I've never been in front of a panel like that, but I had to defend my honest thesis in front of 8 academic staff members. I tell you what, it's a very horrifying position to be in. If you don't know your material inside and out, what normally will happen is that the judge, in this case, will home in on areas that you are deficient. And you watch Judge Hamilton dig into Laura Nyrider to break the chink in her armor. It's very, very strategic the way he behaved.
What was the source of the confession to cutting Miss Hallbach's throat after raping her?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
It's not
Source?
new. It's not news sources, is it?
No, Your Honor.
So it's either Dassey's memory or his imagination.
It's not in the media. You're correct. It's either his memory or his imagination. And it's that sequence in which the interrogators are trying to get him to say.
Well, it's clear he's been very resistant up to that point. He's telling a contradictory story that doesn't make any sense, and they're calling him on it. It comes out very slowly and painfully, but he volunteers it.
Now, this is the fuckery. I'm sorry that I have to say it. I'm sorry. I'm going to do a Big Jeff now. Neither Wiegert nor Fassbender had any forensic proof of Teresa Hallbach's throat being cut. They had nothing to back it up. They had nothing to corroborate it. So hence, Brendan Dassey could have said, yeah, I jumped on her head. We did this. We threw her around. He could have said anything. So the question now becomes, why are they now giving more weight or any form of attention for Brendan saying, yeah, we cut her throat, right? So in other words, Brendan could have said anything. Neither Fassbender nor Wiegert had any forensic proof. The only forensic proof they had was that Teresa's blood was in the back of her own RAV4, right? That's 100% forensic proof. Secondly, they had cranial bone fragments with 2 bullet holes. Now, remember, no bones have been tested. They have not tested any of the bones. The only material that was tested was, as Jack 61 will back me up, is item BZ, muscle tissue. And it got a 7 out of 15 loci match. I understand why. So hence, let me tell you right now, the state had limited forensic evidence. They could not corroborate anything else what Brendan Dassey told them. Do you guys agree or disagree?
Absolutely agree. No corroboration at all.
I mean, to put it in simple terms, we don't know to this day, whether you believe Stephen and Brendan are guilty or not. We don't know to this day whether her throat was cut. We don't have a knife. We don't have any blood. What do you have? What do you have, Doc? 2 words, right? Fuck all.
Completely fuck all. This is a case. This is a case in which a young kid got sent to prison on, wait for it, words.
Of that confession, every primary plot point is a result of suggestion. Now, it's true that after the interrogators introduce a plot point, they allow Brendan to embellish.
Like what? You went inside?
You went inside the house, yes.
And then you're holding them responsible for all the details that come after that.
I'm not holding them responsible, Your Honor, but I'm pointing out that what happened was they used false promises of leniency combined with fact feeding at every crucial step of the story.
What's the fact feeding? I guess I'm having trouble with that in the early stages of the interview.
Absolutely. I think you went over to Stephen Avery's house at Separate Appendix 54. You went back in that room, Separate Appendix 61. Does he ask you to rape Hallbach, Separate Appendix 60? You were there when she died, Separate Appendix 67. After they give him each step.
Not being a lawyer, and you get what you pay for my lawyerly advice. The question that's before the court is not the factual correctness of Brendan's confession, but the admissibility of Brendan's confession. And I agree that from the fact-based perspective, there's nothing there, right? There's no forensic evidence, not one lick of it. But that doesn't have any bearing. The factualness of it doesn't have any bearing on the admissibility of it. So I think she deliberately, well, in my expert legal opinion, that I didn't go to Marquette, so I didn't pass the Wisconsin bar, and I'm not a lawyer.
That is provably untrue.
Is there any physical evidence at all that ties Dassey to the murder?
No, Your Honor, there's nothing that did not come from the fact feeding that occurred during this interrogation. I expect you'll hear the state suggest that he led them to a bullet in the garage. That's not the case. Brendan has the shooting at first happening outside by the bonfire pit. And the officers say to him, because they know they've found 10 shell casings in that garage already. They say to him, no, Brendan, we know some things happened in that garage. We need to get the honesty about the garage. That's when he moves the murder into the garage. Then they research the garage and discover this bullet. That corroborates not Brendan Dassey's account, but the interrogators.
Strong point. That doesn't corroborate the confession, it corroborates the interrogators' movements, right? Yet they fed it. It's so nice. It's so nicely put together.
So what have they got? They got cranial bone fragments that got 2 entrance holes in it, right? They've obviously got Stephen Avery's gun, a rifle, which actually belonged to Roland Johnson, that was confiscated from his bedroom. So the state had the cranial bone fragments, a rifle, and some empty shells. What do you think they needed to close the case? They needed Brendan Dassey to admit, oh yeah, we shot her in the head. Hence, they can now bring in item FL. That was their whole game, to get Brendan Dassey to admit to a shooting. That is exactly what did Mr. Kratz say, Jack 61? Item FL was my what?
Game changer.
Game changer.
Sorry,
That's
Jack.
right. That's okay. That's all right.
I always like to bring up too, if you're having a sports, and if for a sports analogy, if you have a game chase, if there's a game changer, is the game going particularly well for you in the first place? It seems to me the game
clearly not.
This changed the game. It was not going well, but then this changed the game for me, right? So that's in and of itself is sort of an embedded, assessment from Mr. Kratz himself of how his game was going for him, sort of before the March 1st incident.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, would you please give Mr. Burke 3 more minutes?
The details that Dassey provided that are most telling are his memories of Teresa. He remembers her screaming, "Help me," and seeing her naked and chained up to the bed. He remembers her crying and pleading with him to stop while he raped her. He remembers her breathing after Avery stabbed her in the stomach, and that she's still struggling to breathe after he cut her throat. He remembers that her belly wasn't moving as they carried her out to the garage. And he remembers the awful smell as her body burned. None of those memories were planted. They were raw and real. Dassey wanted to get them out, and he did so voluntarily. I would ask this court to reverse the district court's unprecedented order.
Brendan's the only one about regarding the foul smell. The only one. Nobody else. And another thing that's hard to believe, in my opinion, is the most horrific thing that happened, or one of the many horrific things, but the thing that I think would have the most impact on me, if I were to see it, was the dismemberment, right? We know that there's no way to reduce a body to that level of cremains. Really, the only way to do it is to use a burned barrel, so you get that reflected heat from the sides of the barrel. But to do that, you can't fit a body in the barrel. You have to dismember it, and we have the cut marks from the bones that give the indication of dismemberment. Where was it dismembered, and how was it dismembered? And did Brendan see that? How could he not see it if he says he saw stuff, and if he was there for the murder, and if as he claims he saw the toes in the fire, but he'd go back home for the dismemberment? How was it done? Where was it done? What tools? what kind of force does it take to cut through large human bone? That to me seems like it would have a tremendous effect on him. And why would he not talk about that? Why would that not be a question that they talk about? They knew about the dismemberment. Did he help? Did he, that would, to me, would leave a gigantic impression. Even seeing the the severing himself, or perhaps taking part in it, but just witnessing it or seeing a severed limb is just a nasty thing that's going to stay with you. That's you're not going to be able to put that easily out of your mind.
It's just to go along with what you were talking about a minute ago, Doc. Not a single agent or police officer that I'm aware of made a single comment about any strong odor coming from Avery's burn pit. Not one. And that's, I have to fully believe if she would have been burnt in that pit, dismembered or whole, which obviously could never happen, but even dismembered, that odor would still be there. I was going to say, there'd have to be a huge amount of fuel fed into that barrel, to a burn barrel, any burn barrel, over hours and hours and hours.
A fire that big roars. It makes noise. So what are we expected to believe, that there was this gigantic fire to the point where that the burn barrel was glowing red, and nobody inside of the Dassey household, and everybody was home, right? That night, including Barb. Nobody saw.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, Big Jeff. And Jeff's aware of what I'm maybe aware of what I'm fixing to talk about, and that's the statement by Redaunt and his vision of being able to see Dassey's burn barrel from where he was at. What do we find out from those pictures, the photos that we've been showing on the lives?
You can't see the burn barrel from
No
Redaunt's position.
You cannot
see Stephen's burn barrel from his position.
Correct.
The closest burn barrel to him is none other than the Yonder burn barrels.
That's right.
It's
That's exactly right.
Across. Just those photos we've been looking at, right, Jack? Is straight across.
That's right.
I mean, if you stand in Dassey's backyard, you can't not see the hunting, the cabin area.
The deer camp.
Jack 61 made a very valid point regarding a dismemberment. Hey, it's going to be messy. It's going to be really bad. 2 points. Brendan Dassey faints at the sight of blood, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, are you trying to tell me that Brendan Dassey is so callous, so disturbed, that an hour or so before he had sex with Teresa Hallbach, raped her, and yet a couple of hours later he witnessed her execution and then helped his uncle put her in the fire to cremate her?
Not a chance in hell. Not a chance in hell.
The federal court is a sanctuary of sorts, a place where generally the best lawyers practice, the arguments that are made are elevated. It's a very dignified place. And I think when the arguments were happening in court, it was at a very high level and it respected the process. And then we came downstairs and there was all this commotion. And I went over and walked over to see what was happening. And Ken Kratz was holding a press conference.
My name is Ken Kratz. I'm the former special prosecutor in the Brendan Dassey case. I am hopeful on behalf of the state that this decision will affirm what it is that the state courts of Wisconsin have consistently held in this case, that there was no improper influence, no coercion.
If he wants to hold a press conference, we all know about his press conferences. If he wants to do that, do it on his turf. Don't come into the federal district court and the federal appellate court in Chicago and soil the process.
Of what he did here. And, most people, again, they're not aware of these emails between Fallon and Kratz, and I think Bassbender was copied, and, all this begging and pleading, I can help, and, can you get me a seat in the hearing, and blah, blah, blah. I got to be a part of this whole process. So he could come there and peddle his damn book.
Well, yeah. Jeff, you realize that these programs are not good for our mental health and also for our iPads, because I just proved that an iPad can be thrown through the air. Right, Jack 61?
I set mine away from me tonight, Doc. I put it away from me, knowing.
Well, just a couple of points here, guys. First of all, Mr. Kratz's biggest beef with people, that the producers that made Netflix, was that we're profiteering from the crime, the actual crime, the murder of Teresa Halbach. And yet, here's Mr. Kratz at an en banc hearing to do with Brendan Dassey, and he puts up a stand to promote his book, right? Because he actually did talk about his book. And it's so disgusting that he has a press conference just basically to say, hey, look, guys, nothing to see here. There was no form of coercion. Wait a minute, Mr. Kratz. Isn't that the job of the en banc attorney, judges that were there, not yours? Why are you commenting? So it's amazing, guys. Mr. Kratz has not learned a thing from his March 2nd press conference. In effect, he did a sanitized version right there in front of the cameras. And he says, remember what he said? I'm not attracted to all these cameras. Garbage. He was front and center.
He never met a camera he didn't like.
It does bring us to that point in the episode where we kick it on over to Big Jeff for one of his now famous wrap-up sessions. I can't even remember what your bold prediction was.
My bold prediction was that Dr. Silkman would be the first one to lose it. Trying to explain not in simple words, but in very complicated and convoluted terms, exactly how Brendan Dassey offered this out of his own heart, as opposed to being coerced, when nothing could be further from the truth. And just his words, his verbal demeanor, and the way he has to weasel word is very obvious and very shameful of Judge Hamilton to buy into this political crap. And ending on that narcissist Ken Kratz is just is unbelievable that he did that. The height of hubris, it really is. As if people heard from him. My late dad, God rest his soul, used to have an expression. He was not one for mild expression, and that one is, if I wanted to heal from an asshole, I would have farted. So that's what I think of you, Ken. I did not want to hear. No one wanted to really hear from you. I'm surprised they put the cameras on you. That's it. I can't go anymore. On to the next, and I can't wait.
I'm with you, Big Jeff. I feel that's the feeling all around, isn't it, Dr. Silkman? It was a lively one.
It was. I mean, all jokes aside, it was a really very interesting episode, very heartbreaking. That poor kid, Brendan Dassey, did not receive proper justice. He was just a plaything for Paul Berg, right? It's rather amazing how Paul Berg can ride roughshod over everything, avoid everything that hurt his particular case. And look, kudos to Laura Nyrider for being so brave to stand in front of three judges. Like I said, if you've never been in that situation, you've got no idea what it's like. Yes, I've never been in front of three judges, but I had to defend my honest thesis in front of 8 professors, academic staff members, and they will rip you from top to bottom. You have to be really well prepared. And I kudos to Laura. for standing up for what she believed in. And yeah, guys, seeing Ken Kratz's face at the end, it just made everything turn bad. On to the next one, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Silkman and Jack. We're on to the next, but there's a little bit to wrap up yet. I'm sure you have some comments.
I do. I just look at Ken Kratz and, I think about all the things that, he publicly said to, these various cameras. Like I said, there's not a camera out there that he didn't fall in love with. And I think about all the backroom stuff that really is not, well, I mean, it's more public now, but obviously the things that he was doing in the background, going all the way back to, hell, the 80s and the 90s and, on forward. And then, hell, you move into the, after the cases are over, he self-implodes. And I think there's many more victims of him out there in the world that never stepped forward and had the courage of some of the other ones that did come forward and finally got his ass removed. And even beyond that, he goes even, forward and more. And all this stuff comes up with Brendan, when Laura and Drizzen, they submit this brief to Judge Duffin, and he comes back and affirms it. He says, hey, you got to let this kid out or you got to retry him. You got 90 days. And they went into warp speed in Wisconsin. Brad Schimmel was, you can imagine the phone lines burning up all over the state. And, and then for this son of a bitch to show up at this hearing to try to horn in, and he's in the meantime writing to everyone in the world back not too long prior to this, begging to get access to his old case files, the old records, so he could write his book and make money off of this. This guy is, I got to stop right there. I want to read one thing and then I'm going to pass it on. And this was something that was put together by Becca Chu. How long has it been? Wednesday, March 1st, 2006. I'll read a couple of these. I won't read them all. 6,210 days, 17 years, 204 months. And then the last one I'll read is, well, that's the last one I'm going to read. I mean, this kid's been trapped in a cage through really, because he did not have the tools to protect himself and fend off these veteran detectives, and he found himself hung in a quagmire, and he can't get out of it. On to the next.
Well, that's right. On to the next. And Kelly, I know you didn't have much to say, but I think in the private chat you were kind of echoing what we were saying. So why don't you give us your comments and lead us out of episode 26?
Yeah, I just want to say that I support everything the panel said today. That's why I didn't weigh in much. As we all know, Brendan is a very hard topic to discuss. It emotionally connects you, and every time we bring him up, you just fall into that pain of what this poor kid has gone through. But everything the gentleman said today, I couldn't have said it better, and there was no point me just unmuting just to agree. You all know that I support it, and I just want to thank them for being the voice for all of us. And yeah, on to the next, and let's still keep fighting for Brennan and Stephen.
Absolutely, Kel. Thank you, guys. So this is Jeff Jones for Dr. Silkman and Jack, Kelly, and Big Jeff saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.